Welcome. Today in this presentation, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the Reconstruction era, which lasts from 1865 to 1877. If you notice in the right-hand corner a familiar face, this is Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, who was the President during the Civil War, and he's also the President during the first part of Reconstruction. He was assassinated at the end of the Civil War. And this gentleman right here is Andrew Johnson, and he became the President of the United States after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Andrew Johnson and Abraham Lincoln had varying viewpoints of how Reconstruction should be carried out. We'll talk about that more later. And this picture right here is a group of African American men, primarily soldiers, casting a vote for the first time. We're going to talk about what amendments allowed for this event to happen. Right here is one of my favorite people in American history, guy with the wild hair. This is Frederick Douglass, a great orator, abolitionist. One of my favorite quotes of his is, he said, "Without struggle, there's no progress." In this picture right here is the ruins of Richmond, Virginia after the Civil War. Over here is the battle flag for the Confederacy, particularly the battle flag in Northern Virginia, and the American flag or the Union flag. Right here is the map of the South after the Civil War, which is primarily Reconstruction. Here's some pictures. This is Charleston, South Carolina, Richmond, Virginia, and Columbia, South Carolina. We're going to analyze those pictures to describe how Reconstruction was and why they call the time period after the Civil War Reconstruction. So, what was Reconstruction? I'm going to sum up these bullet points, not to bore you to death. Reconstruction is basically a time where when something is broken, you got to put it back together. So we know that the United States was divided and broken after the Civil War. You had the North, which was the Union, and the South, which is the Confederacy. So Reconstruction was a time period and process of readmitting all those Confederate states in the South back into the Union, where we're one all big, one happy family. And this took a very long time. It was dangerous, it was treacherous, it was hard, it was difficult, a lot of arguing, but it finally got back together. It wasn't pretty. So I'm going to go back up here and look at the word Reconstruction. The word construction means to make or to build or create, like a construction site, building a house, a building, a bridge, anything. And means, it's the prefix or suffix, whatever you want to call it. It means to do again, or like a review, repeat, revenge, something to do again. So putting the country back together again, making it oneness, making it whole. Reconstruction policies. Policies are laws that the government sets up for people to follow. Businesses have policies, school board have policies, teachers have policies. So policies are basically rules and actions that are put in place for people to obey and follow. The Reconstruction policies were tough on the South, and they created a lot of problems in the South. And I'm going to talk about that later. Reconstruction also was a time period that gave meaning to the freedom that former enslaved African Americans had achieved. So you had 4 million ex-slaves who had to adapt and adjust to freedom because they used to be slaves. They're not used to that. And that was carried out by Amendments 13th, 14th, and 15th. Reconstruction amendments that promoted civil rights for African Americans. I'll give you a basic rundown. Basic provision or provision. Provision basically means something that's provided, given, something you're allowed to do, or allowed to have, or possess. 13th Amendment banned slavery in the United States and its territories. Slavery is no more. 14th Amendment gave citizenship to all persons born in the U.S. and guarantees them equal protection under the law. So equal protection under law means that the law is applied equally. Like if somebody steals an apple and the penalty is that they go to jail, that applies to everybody, not one group over another. You want to make sure things are fair. The 15th Amendment ensures that all citizens have the right to vote, regardless of your race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So if you were a servant or slave, okay, before, you can vote. You can't be denied the right to vote because of the fact that you used to be a slave or you were a servant. But you're going to find out that the 15th Amendment really didn't mean anything during Reconstruction because of Jim Crow laws, which we're going to talk about later on in this PowerPoint and later on in our class. So on this page, you have some illustrations, and what you have to do is, for each illustration, you need to write the Reconstruction Amendment that goes with each illustration and explain your matches. And you're going to use the 14th, 15th, and 13th Amendment to write under each picture and tell me briefly why you think that goes there. Here's a broken shackle. That's something slaves used to wear. Here's a picture of people being sworn in to become citizens. It's a naturalization ceremony. And here are people casting their right to vote for leaders to run their country, community, or state. And that's what you have to do for this part. For this part, you need to read these excerpts. I'm not going to read them out loud. You're going to identify the amendment that goes with each excerpt. You're either going to use 14th Amendment, 13th Amendment, and 15th Amendment. So each amendment is going to go with one of these excerpts. An excerpt is a brief statement from a bigger text or paragraph. Reconstruction policies and problems. This is the meat of Reconstruction. Okay. So Southern military leaders could not hold office. They couldn't serve in the federal government. They couldn't be a congressman. They couldn't be a senator. They couldn't be a governor, mayor, or any type of position in the government after the Civil War, up until basically 1872. We'll talk about why later. African Americans could hold public office. You had African Americans who were governors and senators. There's a picture of these people who were governors and senators who were African American in this presentation. You have the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which was passed by the Congress to make sure African Americans had equal rights after the Civil War. Once you're a slave, you have to be treated like a citizen and given rights. And in order for that to happen, also, is that you need to have federal troops to enforce that, to protect African Americans' rights. Okay, because some people in the South still thought African Americans were not like white people. They should not be treated like Americans. They still should be considered slaves, inferior. You had Northern soldiers who had to supervise the South under the Reconstruction Acts. And there's a map that shows the different military districts that Northern soldiers had to supervise. Supervise means to watch over. You have to keep in mind that the South was broken, the country was broken, everything's chaotic, messy, doom and gloom, chaotic. It's just like if I were to leave you guys in the classroom all by yourself, and you would go haywire. Hopefully you wouldn't. Be throwing paper airplanes, running around the room, throwing trash, arguing, fighting, just running, tearing things up, just cutting it up. So you need a teacher, or in this case, you need a supervisor to make sure things are in order. Things are organized. Things are straight. Things are running smoothly. Things are going back together. Because you got to keep in mind the word reconstruction means to be brought back together, to be rebuilt, keep order. And the South wasn't like that after the Civil War. Then you had an organization created by Abraham Lincoln called the Freedmen's Bureau, and that was established to provide aid for former enslaved African Americans in the South. This organization built schools. They educated African Americans in reading and writing. They taught them how to find a job. They supervised contracts between the worker and the boss to make sure they weren't taken advantage of. They established colleges and universities like Fisk University and Howard and Tuskegee, so African Americans can move on up and be awesome and become great citizens, become educated in just life. And there's more about Freedmen's Bureau in your book. Then you had the Carpetbaggers, who were people from the North who traveled down to the South to live, and they wanted to restore the Southern economy. A lot of them bought up lands and railroad companies, and they took advantage of Southerners, and they bought things at lower prices and they sold them at higher prices. So the word carpetbagger is still used today for anybody from the North who comes down to the South to live. Okay, and they took advantage of Southerners after Reconstruction, after the Civil War during Reconstruction. Southern states adopted black codes to limit the economic and physical freedom of former slaves. And black codes were passed in response to the 13th Amendment, which banned slavery, and also 14th Amendment, which gave African Americans equal protection of the law, under the law and citizenship. Black codes were very restrictive. They were passed in the South. If you were black or African American, you couldn't hunt, you couldn't own a gun, you had to prove that you had a job. You basically were restricted. You basically treated like a slave. You're physically free. So the black codes limited economic and physical freedom of former slaves. You couldn't even move. You couldn't move to another community. You had to. It was very difficult. You had to have people vouch for you to say that you could do something, because they thought you were going to be a criminal. So black codes made it difficult for African Americans to be really free when they actually were physically free. Here's a map of the South after the Civil War during Reconstruction. And you're going to do questions 1 through 6. We'll probably do this as a class, but you have to do this. Here are 3 pictures of important men during Reconstruction and their legacies. You should recognize all of them. You've seen them throughout U.S. history. You have Abraham Lincoln. Then you have Frederick Douglass. You have Robert E. Lee. Lincoln basically wanted reconciliation. Reconciliation basically means that you make up for something. You get over a bad situation. Like you have a fight with somebody or argument, you kind of make up and become friends. You kind of brush it off. You don't hold a grudge. And that's what Lincoln wanted after the Civil War. He didn't want to punish the South for seceding. He wanted unity. He said it was more important to preserve the Union than to punish the South. Malice towards none. That was in his second inaugural address. Bind up the wounds. Here's Frederick Douglass. Abolitionists fought for the adoption of constitutional amendments that guaranteed voting rights. Was a powerful voice for human rights and civil liberties for all people. He was also instrumental in the women's suffrage movement. We're going to talk more about him later. When we talk about the women's suffrage movement, we're going to refer to him. Then you have Robert E. Lee. He urged Southerners to reconcile with Northerners at the end of the war and reunite as Americans, with some wanted to continue to fight. And he became the president of Washington College, which is now known as Washington Lee University in Lexington. So with these quotes right here, you're going to read them and you're going to match it to the person who said it. A lot of these are self-explanatory, but if you go back to the previous material and look at the picture and the caption of what they were about and their legacy was about, you can apply who would probably say that. Okay. Here's some African American elected officials during Reconstruction: governors and senators. Very proud men. Reconstruction ended in 1877 with the election of 1876. Federal troops were removed from the South, and rights that African Americans had gained were lost to Jim Crow laws. And there you go.